What determines the level of taxation and redistribution in a country is a question that has received a lot of attention by economists and political scientists in the last few decades. In the classic paper of Meltzer and Ritter, published in the Journal of Political Economy in 1981, they propose a mechanism based on the median voter theorem, in which inequality is the main driver of redistributive taxation. In a democratic political environment, an increase in inequality makes the median voter poorer with respect to the country average, and that fosters pressures for redistribution. Even though this theory has been applied and used for the analysis of different phenomena, the empirical robustness is not clear. Early empirical studies based on cross-sectional analysis, as well as more recent panel data analysis, do not find conclusive support for the theory. So although based on an appealing economic logic, the Meltzer-Ritter effect does not seem to completely explain the relationship between inequality and redistribution. In this paper, I try to shed some light on this issue by introducing two additional features in the theoretical framework: imperfect tax enforcement in the form of tax evasion and social mobility. Both of them try to capture the idea that the practical implementation of fiscal policy is not on trouble, but depends on the level of voluntary participation of individuals. Tax evasion can be seen as an outside option for those relatively rich individuals who expect to be harmed by redistributive taxation. As a result, it limits the amount of redistribution and the resources that the relatively poor majority can extract from the rich. Therefore, the pivotal voter needs to take into account the incentives in terms of compliance and evasion of the rich when voting over tax rates. Now, if there is social mobility in the country, so the possibility of climbing or falling along the income ladder, then fiscal policy serves two purposes: redistribution from rich to poor, but also insurance against future income risk. Now, these two components determine how a particular individual values fiscal policy. Think of a rich individual today. In a world of low social mobility, he expects to be harmed by the redistributive component of fiscal policy, and the insurance component is small because the potential fall and the possibility of falling along the income ladder is low. As a result, he's going to try to slip away from the tax and transfer system by any means available to him. Instead, if there is high social mobility, the possibility of falling down the income ladder makes the insurance component of fiscal policy more valuable to him, and therefore he is more likely to voluntarily participate in the tax and transfer system. I formalize this intuition in a political economy model. The main result is that the relationship between inequality and redistribution now depends on the level of social mobility. In particular, in high mobility societies, an increase in inequality is associated with an increase in taxes, but in low mobility societies, higher inequality leads to lower taxation. I empirically analyzed this result with a sample of 72 countries for the period between 1960 and 2015. I use an interaction term model that captures how the effect of inequality and redistribution depends on the level of social mobility of the country. And I use two approaches. One is a cross-sectional long-run approach using long-run average of the variables in the spirit of the early test of the Meltzer and Ritter hypothesis. The second uses panel data closer to more recent studies on the inequality and redistribution, inequality and growth relationship. In both cases, I find empirical support for the prediction of the theoretical model. In particular, higher market inequality does not change redistribution and thus implies an equivalent increase in net inequality when social mobility is relatively low. Instead, for observations with the highest levels of social mobility, an increase of 1 point in the Gini index before taxes and transfers does not change net inequality. That means redistribution is compensating the initial increase in inequality, so that after taxes and transfers inequality does not change. Overall, the paper points to the importance of taking into account the practical implementation of fiscal policy and also to think about how policies that try to increase the level of social mobility in the country can, as a byproduct, help reduce and tackle increases in inequality.